Billionaire arrived at his wedding cold and proud, until he saw his ex-wife holding a baby in her arms. Before we begin, drop a comment telling us which city you're watching from, and once the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Oh, and make sure to follow our channel for more stories like this. Now, sit back and enjoy every detail. He never thought a piece of paper could feel so heavy. Thatcher Rowe stood in his 42nd floor penthouse office, holding the cream-colored wedding invitation between his fingers like it might catch fire. The afternoon Manhattan skyline stretched endlessly beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, but his attention was fixed on the elegant script that spelled out his sister's happiness. Rowena Rowe and Camden Fletcher, request your presence. 2 years. It had been exactly 2 years since he'd signed those divorce papers, each signature feeling like a small death. 2 years since Hazel Quinn had walked out of his life, taking with her the only warmth his sterile world had ever known. His assistant, Beverly, knocked softly on the glass door. Mr. Rowe, the Meridian Holdings meeting is in 10 minutes. Cancel it, he said without turning around. Beverly blinked in surprise. Thatcher Rowe never canceled meetings. Sir? They've flown in from Dubai specifically. I said cancel it. She nodded quickly and disappeared, leaving him alone with the invitation and the weight of memories he'd spent 2 years burying under 18-hour workdays and ruthless business deals. Thatcher walked to his desk where a silver-framed photo sat face down in the drawer he never opened. He pulled it out now, his thumb tracing the glass. Hazel's laugh was frozen in time, her head thrown back, eyes crinkled with joy. They'd been at some forgettable charity gala, but she'd made it unforgettable just by being herself. You never told her you loved her, a voice whispered in his mind. Not once, not properly. He'd convinced himself that providing for her was enough. The penthouse apartment, the designer clothes, the credit cards with no limits. He'd built an empire thinking that success would somehow translate into love, that his silence could be filled with material comfort. But Hazel had wanted him, just him, present, engaged, human, and he'd given her everything except the one thing she actually needed. His phone buzzed. A text from Rowena. Please tell me you're coming. I know it's complicated, but I need my big brother there. She'll understand. We all will. Thatcher closed his eyes. His sister was marrying Camden Fletcher, a small-town veterinarian she'd met during one of her spontaneous road trips. The kind of man who probably said, I love you every morning over coffee and meant it every single time. The kind of man Thatcher had never learned how to be. Another photo caught his eye. This one of Rowena and Hazel from last Christmas, arms linked, both glowing with the kind of friendship that had somehow survived even his spectacular failure as a husband. His sister had made it clear, Hazel would be there, as maid of honor, as family, because she still is family, even if you threw that away. Thatcher picked up his phone and scrolled to a number he'd memorized but never called. His finger hovered over Hazel's name for a long moment before he clicked it shut. What would he say? That he'd spent 2 years learning how to live without her and failed miserably at it? That every business triumph felt hollow because she wasn't there to share it? That he'd rather face a hostile takeover than see her again? He walked to the window, placing his palm against the cool glass. Somewhere out there, Hazel was living a life that didn't include him. Maybe she'd moved on. Maybe she'd found someone who knew how to love her properly, with words and presence, and all the things he'd been too proud or too scared to give. The thought made his chest tighten in a way that felt dangerously close to panic. Beverly's voice came through the intercom. Mr. Rowe, your driver is here for the airport. Airport. Right. He'd made the decision without fully realizing it. His assistant had already booked the flight to San Francisco, arranged the rental car, confirmed his hotel in Napa Valley. Somewhere in his subconscious, he'd known he would go. Because despite everything, despite the pride, the fear, the 2 years of carefully constructed indifference, he couldn't miss his sister's wedding, even if it meant facing the woman whose heart he'd broken, even if it meant confronting the man he'd become in her absence. As the elevator descended toward the lobby, Thatcher caught his reflection in the polished steel doors. Same sharp jawline, same steel gray eyes, same perfectly tailored suit, but something was different, something that looked almost like hope, and that scared him more than any boardroom battle ever had. Some places hold memories like wine holds its flavor, deep, complex, and impossible to forget. The rental car's GPS announced his arrival at Silverbrook Vineyard, just as the sun began its descent behind the rolling hills of Napa Valley. Thatcher gripped the steering wheel tighter, watching dust motes dance in the golden light streaming through his windshield. This place looked exactly like something Rowena would choose. Rustic elegance wrapped in fairy lights and wild romance. Everything he wasn't. Cars lined the gravel driveway, modest sedans mixed with a few luxury vehicles, but nothing ostentatious. This wasn't his world of corporate galas and calculated networking. This was real life, where people laughed too loudly and hugged too long and said exactly what they meant. As he parked, Thatcher caught sight of familiar faces setting up chairs near a wooden arbor draped in white roses. His chest constricted. Somewhere among these people was Hazel. Thatcher! Rowena's voice cut through his spiraling thoughts. His sister practically bounced across the gravel, her pre-wedding glow making her look like she'd swallowed sunshine. Before he could brace himself, she launched into his arms with the enthusiasm of a golden retriever. "You came," she whispered against his shoulder. "I wasn't sure you would." "I said I would." His voice came out rougher than intended. She pulled back, studying his face with the knowing look she'd perfected in childhood. "You look terrible." "Thanks. Very reassuring before I meet your future husband." Rowena laughed, linking her arm through his. "Camden's going to love you. He thinks all billionaires are secretly softies who rescue stray cats. I don't rescue stray cats. Yet." She winked. "Come on, let me show you around before the rehearsal dinner. Fair warning, Mom's here and she's already asked 3 times if you're bringing someone." Thatcher's stomach dropped. "What did you tell her?" "That you're working on it." Rowena's tone turned gentle. "I also told her that certain topics are off limits tonight." They walked toward the vineyard's main building, a converted barn with exposed beams and mason jar lights. The scent of jasmine and fresh bread filled the air, along with the distant sound of laughter and clinking glasses. It was the kind of place where conversations happened over shared meals and secrets spilled like wine. "She's here, isn't she?" Thatcher asked quietly. Rowena nodded. "She's my maid of honor, Thatch. She has been since we were 16 and planning our dream weddings in my bedroom. I couldn't not ask her." "I know." And he did. His sister's loyalty was fierce and uncomplicated, nothing like the mess he'd made of his own relationships. "Is she happy?" The question hung between them like a confession. Rowena stopped walking, turning to face him fully. "That's not my question to answer, but I will say this. She's different now. Stronger, more sure of herself." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "She's been through some things." Things. The word felt loaded with implications he wasn't ready to examine. "Thatcher, honey." His mother's voice carried across the courtyard like a heat-seeking missile. Lorraine Rowe approached in a cloud of expensive perfume and barely contained curiosity, her silver hair perfectly coiffed despite the outdoor setting. "Mom." He submitted to her embrace, inhaling the familiar scent of Chanel No. 5 and maternal concern. "You look thin," she declared, stepping back to examine him like a scientist studying a specimen. "Are you eating actual meals or just surviving on those protein bars and coffee?" "I eat meals." "With other people? At tables? Using actual plates?" Rowena snorted. "She's got you there." Before Thatcher could defend his perfectly adequate eating habits, a burst of laughter drew his attention to the vineyard's tasting room. Through the open French doors, he caught a glimpse of flowing fabric and recognized the melody of a laugh he'd once memorized. His entire body went still. "She's helping with the seating chart," Rowena said softly, following his gaze. "Making sure everyone feels welcome and included. You know how she is." Yes, he knew exactly how she was. Hazel had always been the one to remember birthdays, to ask about sick relatives, to make the lonely person at the party feel seen. She had a gift for making people feel important, a gift he'd taken for granted until it was gone. "Maybe I should go to the hotel," he said suddenly. "Let you all enjoy the evening without what? Without my brother?" Rowena's voice carried a note of steel he recognized from their childhood arguments. "You're staying. You're going to eat dinner with our family and friends, and you're going to remember how to be human for a few hours." "I am human." "Are you?" His mother's question was gentle but pointed. "Because for the past 2 years, you've been more like a very successful ghost." The truth of it hit him like a physical blow. He had been haunting his own life, moving through the motions of living without actually being present for any of it. Work, sleep, work, repeat. No relationships that required vulnerability. No conversations that demanded emotion. No moments that asked him to be anything more than the calculating businessman he'd perfected. A small commotion near the tasting room drew their attention. A woman was backing out of the doorway, clearly struggling with something heavy. "Let me help," came a voice that stopped Thatcher's heart cold. Hazel. She moved into view, reaching for what appeared to be a large floral arrangement, her dark hair catching the early evening light. She wore a simple sundress the color of sea glass, and when she turned slightly, laughing at something the other woman said, Thatcher saw her profile. Still beautiful, still luminous, still everything he'd lost, but different too. There was a steadiness to her movements, a confidence in the way she held herself. This wasn't the uncertain young woman who'd tiptoed around his moods and silences. This was someone who'd learned to take up space. "She looks good," he said without thinking. Rowena squeezed his arm. "Yeah, she does." And that was exactly what he was afraid of. Sometimes the heart recognizes home before the mind catches up. The rehearsal dinner was set on the vineyard's stone terrace where string lights created constellations above long wooden tables laden with wildflowers and wine. Thatcher found himself strategically seated between Camden's elderly uncle and a family friend who spoke exclusively about her rescue dogs. A buffer zone Rowena had clearly orchestrated. He should have felt grateful. Instead, he felt like a coward. 3 tables over, Hazel sat with the other bridesmaids, her laugh carrying on the evening breeze like music he'd forgotten he loved. She was animated, gesturing with her wine glass, as she told some story that had the whole table leaning in. The woman beside her, Camden's sister if he remembered correctly, was practically glowing with amusement. This was the Hazel he remembered from their early days together, before his silences had taught her to dim her light. "You're staring," Rowena murmured, sliding into the empty chair beside him with the stealth of a seasoned spy. "I'm observing. Is that what we're calling it?" She followed his gaze. "She's telling them about the time we got lost in San Francisco trying to find that hole-in-the-wall dim sum place you recommended." His chest tightened. He remembered that day, one of the rare Saturdays he'd actually taken off work. Hazel had insisted on adventure, dragging him and Rowena through Chinatown with nothing but a vague address and boundless optimism. They'd wandered for hours, laughing at wrong turns and sampling strange snacks from street vendors. It was one of the best days of his marriage. "She still talks about you, you know," Rowena said quietly. "In what context?" The question came out sharper than he intended. "Like you're a cautionary tale about brilliant men who don't know how to love themselves, let alone anyone else." The words hit like a precision strike. Thatcher took a long sip of wine, using the time to rebuild his defenses. "Sounds about right." "God, you're exhausting." Rowena turned in her chair to face him fully. "Do you know what she said when I told her you were coming?" He wasn't sure he wanted to know, but his silence was answer enough. She said, "Good. Rowena deserves to have her brother there. That's it. No drama, no demands, no conditions, just grace." Rowena's voice softened. "She's better at being your family than you are." Before Thatcher could respond, Camden appeared behind Rowena's chair, dropping a kiss on the top of her head with the casual intimacy of a man completely secure in his love. "Sorry to interrupt, but your maid of honor is looking for you," Camden said. "Something about tomorrow's flower emergency." Rowena sighed. "What flower emergency?" "The centerpiece roses are apparently too pink and not blush enough. I don't know the difference, but Hazel seems very concerned about the distinction. She's a perfectionist," Thatcher found himself saying. Both Camden and Rowena turned to stare at him. "I mean," he cleared his throat, "she pays attention to details. Always has." Camden studied him with the frank curiosity of a man who'd heard stories but never met the subject. "You must be Thatcher. I'm Camden." He extended his hand. "Thanks for being here. It means everything to Rowena." The handshake was firm, genuine, no hidden agenda or calculation. Just a good man welcoming his fiancée's family. Everything Thatcher had never learned how to be. "Congratulations," Thatcher managed. "She's Rowena's special." "Yeah, she is." Camden's smile was soft with affection. "She talks about you all the time. Her brilliant big brother who conquers corporate America. Conquers corporate America and destroys everything else." "I should go help with the flowers," Rowena said, rising from her chair. She paused, her hand on Thatcher's shoulder. "Be brave, Thatch. Just once, be brave." As they walked away, Thatcher found himself alone with his wine and his thoughts. A dangerous combination. The conversations around him flowed like water around a stone. Stories about Camden's veterinary practice, speculation about the weather for tomorrow's ceremony, gentle teasing about married life, normal people living normal lives with normal amounts of emotional availability. "Excuse me." The voice behind him made every nerve in his body fire at once. He turned slowly, already knowing what he'd find. Hazel stood 3 feet away, holding an empty wine glass and wearing an expression of polite determination. Up close, he could see the changes Rowena had mentioned, a confidence in her posture, a steadiness in her gaze, a strength that hadn't been there before. She was even more beautiful than he remembered. "Hello, Thatcher." Hazel. Her name felt rusty in his mouth, like a word he'd forgotten how to pronounce. I wanted to say hello properly. It felt strange being at the same event and pretending we don't know each other. Right, of course. He stood, immediately towering over her in a way that felt both familiar and foreign. "You look beautiful, radiant, like everything I threw away." "Well, you look well. Thank you." She tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear, a gesture he'd once found endearing and now found devastating. "How are you?" "Miserable. Empty. Counting the minutes until I can leave and pretend this never happened." "Fine. Busy with work." Something flickered across her face. Disappointment, maybe, or recognition of a deflection she'd heard too many times before. "Of course. The Meridian Holdings acquisition went through, didn't it? I saw it in the journal." He blinked in surprise. She was still reading about his deals, still keeping track of his professional life, even after everything. Yes. Yes. An awkward silence stretched between them, filled with the ghost of everything they'd never said to each other. Around them, the dinner party continued its warm chatter, but they might as well have been standing in a vacuum. "I should let you get back to your dinner," Hazel said finally. "Wait." The word escaped before he could stop it. She paused, eyebrows raised in question. Are you happy?" The question hung between them like a confession. Hazel considered him for a long moment, her green eyes unreadable. When she finally spoke, her voice was gentle but firm. "I'm learning to be." And somehow that answer was worse than a simple yes. Perfect moments have a way of revealing imperfect truths. The morning of Rowena's wedding dawned crisp and golden, the kind of California day that made people believe in fairy tales. Thatcher stood on his hotel balcony, adjusting his charcoal tie for the third time while watching early mist rise from the vineyard valleys below. His hands were steady, a skill perfected through years of high-stakes negotiations, but his chest felt like it housed a caged bird. Today, he would have to sit through an entire ceremony about love and commitment, and forever. Today, he would have to watch other people promise each other everything he'd been too broken to give. His phone buzzed. A text from Rowena. "Getting my hair done with the girls. Wish me luck. P.S. You better cry during my vows or I'm disowning you." Despite everything, he smiled. His sister had always been able to make him feel human with just a few words. An hour later, Thatcher arrived at Silverbrook Vineyard to find it transformed into something from a dream. White roses and eucalyptus draped every surface, while gauzy fabric fluttered from oak trees like captured clouds. Guests were already gathering, a mix of Camden's veterinary colleagues, Rowena's art world friends, and scattered Rowe family members who'd flown in from the East Coast. He recognized some faces: his Aunt Margaret, his mother's college roommate, the family lawyer who'd handled his divorce. All people who knew his story, who would look at him with varying degrees of pity and curiosity throughout the day. Thatcher, Camden appeared at his elbow, looking nervous and elated in equal measure. "You clean up nice for a corporate shark. You look terrified." "Completely." Camden grinned. "Best feeling in the world. Your sister has that effect on people." They walked toward the ceremony space, where white chairs formed neat rows facing a flower-draped arbor. The string quartet was tuning their instruments, filling the air with ethereal notes that made everything feel more significant. "Can I ask you something?" Camden said as they paused near the groomsmen gathering point. Thatcher nodded, bracing himself. "Rowena mentioned that you and Hazel," Camden chose his words carefully, "that things ended badly between you two. She's worried about today being awkward." Awkward. Such a small word for the wreckage of a marriage. "It won't be awkward," Thatcher lied smoothly. "We're adults. It's your day." Camden studied him with the perceptive eyes of someone who spent his life reading the unspoken distress of creatures who couldn't voice their pain. For what it's worth, Hazel seems like she's in a good place now. Really good. Before Thatcher could respond, a murmur went through the crowd. The bridesmaids were emerging from the vineyard's main building, a parade of sea-glass blue dresses and radiant smiles. Thatcher's eyes automatically searched for, there she was. Hazel walked with the other women, but somehow seemed to glow with her own light. Her dress was simple, elegant, the soft blue fabric moving like water as she walked. Her dark hair was swept up in loose curls, with small white flowers tucked behind one ear. She looked like springtime, like hope, like everything beautiful he'd convinced himself he didn't deserve. But it wasn't her beauty that stopped his breath. It was what she carried. In her arms, nestled against her chest like he belonged there, was a baby. A little boy with dark hair and chubby cheeks, maybe a year old, wearing a tiny navy suit that made him look like the world's most adorable wedding guest. He was awake, his big eyes taking in all the activity with the solemn curiosity of the very young. Thatcher's world tilted sideways. The timing crashed over him like a wave. Rowena's wedding was in late September. If the baby was around a year old, that would mean no. His mind frantically did the math while his heart hammered against his ribs. 15 months ago, he and Hazel had been divorced for several months already. There was no way. But then the baby turned his head, and Thatcher saw his profile. Gray eyes. The same storm cloud gray that looked back at him from mirrors. The same eyes that had made him famous in boardrooms for their intensity, that his father had called roe eyes, with fierce pride. The same eyes he'd inherited from 5 generations of roe men. "Oh God," he whispered. Camden followed his gaze and then looked back at Thatcher with sudden understanding. "You didn't know." It wasn't a question. Thatcher couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but stare at the child in Hazel's arms. His child, who was now looking directly at him with curious, familiar eyes. The baby made a soft cooing sound, and Hazel looked down at him with such tender affection that Thatcher felt something crack wide open in his chest. Then, as if sensing scrutiny, she raised her head. Her eyes met his across the crowd. For one perfect, terrible moment, the entire wedding party, the guests, the vineyard itself seemed to disappear. There was only Hazel, holding a child with his eyes, looking at him with an expression he couldn't read. She didn't look angry. She didn't look vindictive or satisfied or cruel. She looked sad, profoundly, heartbreakingly sad. The music swelled, signaling the start of the ceremony, and Hazel looked away first. She whispered something to the baby, who snuggled closer to her chest, and then she took her place in the processional line. Thatcher stood frozen as the wedding began around him, his entire understanding of the last 2 years crumbling like a house of cards. He had a son, and he'd never even known the boy existed. Love is witnessed in moments that steal your breath and change everything. Thatcher moved through the ceremony like a man underwater. He found his seat in the 3rd row, between his mother and Aunt Margaret, but he might as well have been floating in space. Every cell in his body was attuned to the child 20 feet away, the little boy who kept making soft babbling sounds that somehow carried over the string quartet. Milo, he remembered suddenly. Hazel had said his name was Milo. His son's name was Milo. "Are you all right, dear?" His mother leaned over, her brow furrowed with concern. "You look pale." "Fine," he managed, though the word felt like gravel in his throat. The processional began, and Thatcher forced himself to focus on his sister. Rowena deserved his attention on her wedding day, not his personal crisis. But as the bridesmaids walked down the petal-strewn aisle, his eyes kept drifting to Hazel. She moved with practiced grace, having clearly done this walk during yesterday's rehearsal. The baby, Milo, was content in her arms, occasionally reaching for the flowers in her bouquet with the grabby enthusiasm of toddlers everywhere. A few guests cooed appreciatively as they passed, charmed by the unexpected addition to the wedding party. Did they know? Thatcher wondered frantically. Did any of these people know that child was his? When Hazel reached the altar, she took her place with the other bridesmaids but kept Milo close. The officiant, an elderly man with kind eyes, smiled at the baby and whispered something that made Hazel's face soften with gratitude. Then the wedding march began and Rowena appeared. For a moment, Thatcher forgot everything else. His sister was luminous in ivory silk, her face glowing with the kind of joy that made everyone around her feel lighter. Their father would have been proud to walk her down this aisle, but he'd died when Rowena was still in college, leaving Thatcher to fill roles he'd never felt qualified for. Like so many things, he thought bitterly. Rowena caught his eye as she passed and winked, just like she had at her high school graduation, her college plays, every milestone where she'd needed to know her big brother was watching. The gesture was so purely Rowena that Thatcher felt his throat close with emotion. When she reached Camden, her soon-to-be husband took her hands with the reverence of a man holding a miracle. The love between them was so palpable that even the cynics in the crowd seemed to melt a little. "Dearly beloved," the officiant began, and Thatcher tried to focus on the words. Something about gathering together, about witnessing love. about the sacred bonds that tie souls together, but his attention kept fracturing. Every time Milo made a sound, every time Hazel shifted him in her arms, every time those familiar gray eyes turned in his direction, Thatcher felt like his carefully constructed world was crumbling piece by piece. Love is not just a feeling, the officiant was saying. It's a choice made daily, in small moments and large gestures, in presence and patience, and the courage to be vulnerable. The words hit like physical blows. Presence, patience, vulnerability. Everything he'd failed to give Hazel. Everything he'd been too afraid, too proud, too damaged to offer. Camden and Rowena have chosen each other not just for who they are today, but for who they promise to become together. Thatcher's eyes found Hazel again. She was swaying slightly, unconsciously soothing Milo, her attention split between the ceremony and her maternal instincts. She looked serene, competent, like motherhood had always been part of her design. She'd done this alone. The realization hit him with stunning force. She'd been pregnant, given birth, raised their son for over a year, and he'd known nothing about it, because he'd made it clear that he didn't want to know, because he'd responded to her attempts at contact with silence, because he'd been so consumed with protecting himself that he'd abandoned them both. Do you, Camden, take Rowena to be your wife? To love her in sickness and in health, in joy and sorrow, for richer or poorer, as long as you both shall live? I do. Camden's voice was strong, certain, filled with the kind of conviction Thatcher had never been able to muster. Do you, Rowena, take Camden to be your husband? To love him in sickness and in health, in joy and sorrow, for richer or poorer, as long as you both shall live? I do. Rowena's voice broke slightly with emotion, but her smile was radiant. As they exchanged rings, Thatcher found himself thinking about his own wedding day. He and Hazel had married in a small ceremony at the courthouse, followed by dinner at an expensive restaurant he'd chosen. Efficient, practical, lacking in any of the raw emotion flowing through this vineyard. Had Hazel wanted something like this? Had she dreamed of flowers and music and vows spoken in front of people who loved them? He'd never asked. He'd assumed that because she'd agreed to the courthouse, it was what she wanted. But maybe she'd just wanted him to want it too. You may kiss your bride. The crowd erupted in applause as Camden and Rowena sealed their marriage with a kiss that was both tender and joyful. Thatcher clapped mechanically, his vision blurring as he watched his sister's happiness. As the newly married couple walked back down the aisle, the wedding party followed. When Hazel passed his row, Milo chose that exact moment to look directly at Thatcher. Their eyes met, gray to gray, and Thatcher felt something fundamental shift inside his chest. The baby didn't know who he was, had no reason to feel anything special about the stranger staring at him. But for one impossible moment it felt like recognition, like coming home to a place he'd never been. Hazel noticed Milo's distraction and followed his gaze. When she saw Thatcher watching them, her step faltered slightly. Her expression was unreadable, but he caught something that looked like pain before she turned away and continued down the aisle. The ceremony was over. The celebration would continue for hours. But for Thatcher, everything had just begun. Because loving someone isn't just about the promises you make. It's about the ones you keep. Some conversations change everything, even when they're built on everything you didn't say. The reception unfolded like a watercolor painting. Soft edges, warm light, and laughter that seemed to float on the evening breeze. Thatcher stood at the edge of the dance floor, nursing his third whiskey and watching Camden spin Rowena under the string lights like she was made of starlight. He should feel happy for them. He was happy for them, but happiness felt like a foreign language he'd forgotten how to speak. Uncle Thatcher. The voice belonged to his 8-year-old niece, Camden's daughter from his first marriage. Iris bounded up to him with the fearless enthusiasm of childhood, her flower girl dress already wrinkled from dancing. Are you going to dance? She asked, tugging on his jacket. Daddy says you're too serious, but I bet you're a good dancer. I don't really dance, sweetheart. That's silly, everyone can dance, look. She demonstrated with an elaborate series of spins that made her dress flare out like a bell. See? Easy. Despite everything, Thatcher smiled. You're right. That does look easy. Will you dance with me? Just one song? Before he could formulate a polite excuse, Iris had grabbed his hand and was pulling him toward the other couples. Thatcher found himself swaying awkwardly to a soft jazz standard, trying to match the rhythm of an 8-year-old who danced like nobody was watching. You're not very good at this, Iris observed with brutal honesty. I'm out of practice. When was the last time you danced? The question hit him unexpectedly. When had he last danced? At his own wedding? Some corporate event where dancing was a social obligation rather than joy? I can't remember, he admitted. Iris looked at him with the kind of piercing curiosity that children wielded like a superpower. That's sad. Dancing is fun. It makes your heart feel light. Light. When had his heart ever felt light? The song ended, and Iris curtsied dramatically before skipping off to find new adventures. Thatcher was left standing alone on the dance floor, feeling more exposed than he had in any boardroom. She's got Camden's confidence. Thatcher turned to find Hazel beside him, Milo balanced on her hip. Up close he could see the fine lines around her eyes, the subtle changes that 2 years had brought. But her voice was the same, warm honey, with just a hint of smoke. He seems like a good father, Thatcher said carefully. He is. He loves her like she's his own. Hazel shifted Milo, who was studying Thatcher with that serious baby expression that somehow felt familiar. Love isn't always about biology. The words carried weight, implications he wasn't sure he was ready to examine. How old is he? Thatcher asked, even though he'd already done the math a dozen times. 15 months. Hazel's voice was neutral, giving nothing away. His birthday was last month, August, which meant he'd been conceived in May 2 years ago, 2 months before their divorce was finalized. During that strange, awful period when they were still sharing a bed but barely speaking, when every conversation felt like walking through a minefield. Hazel, not here. Her voice was gentle but firm. Not at your sister's wedding. Milo chose that moment to reach toward Thatcher, his chubby fingers grasping at the air between them. Without thinking, Thatcher extended his hand, and Milo's tiny fingers wrapped around his index finger with surprising strength. The contact was electric. This small person, this perfect combination of features he recognized, and expressions that were purely his own, holding onto him like an anchor. Hi there, Thatcher whispered, his voice rougher than intended. Milo babbled something that might have been a greeting, his gray eyes, so much like his own, wide with curiosity. He had Hazel's dark hair, but Thatcher's stubborn cowlick, her delicate features, but his determined chin. He's beautiful, Thatcher said, meaning it completely. He looks like you. There was no anger in Hazel's voice, just simple observation. Everyone says so. The implications hung between them like a bridge neither was ready to cross. Did you try to tell me? Thatcher asked quietly. Hazel was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I left 17 voicemails. I sent 43 texts. I even wrote you a letter, an actual, physical letter, and had it hand-delivered to your office. She paused, readjusting Milo against her shoulder. Your assistant said you were too busy to be disturbed. Each word felt like a nail in his coffin. Beverly had screened his calls, filtered his messages, protected him from anything that might disrupt his carefully constructed isolation, including news that he was going to be a father. I didn't know, he said helplessly. I know. And somehow, that simple acceptance was worse than anger would have been. You made it very clear that you didn't want to know anything about my life after our marriage ended. That's not, I never said that. You didn't have to. Hazel looked at him directly, her green eyes steady and sad. Silence says everything, Thatcher. You taught me that. Milo was getting fussy, rubbing his eyes with tiny fists. Hazel began swaying instinctively, the motion so natural it looked like breathing. I should put him down for a nap, she said. There's a quiet room in the main building. Wait, the word escaped before he could stop it. Would it be okay if I walked with you? Just to make sure you find it okay? Hazel studied his face for a long moment, as if looking for something. Whatever she found there must have satisfied her because she nodded. Okay. But Thatcher? She paused, shifting Milo again. Don't make this harder than it already is. As they walked toward the main building, Thatcher caught glimpses of the reception continuing without them. His sister dancing with her new husband, his mother deep in conversation with Camden's parents, guests laughing and celebrating love in all its messy, imperfect glory. He was walking away from the party with his ex-wife and the son he'd never known existed, and for the first time in 2 years, he felt like he was walking toward something that mattered. In silence, some truths finally find their voice. The quiet room turned out to be the vineyard owner's private study, a cozy space lined with leather-bound books and warmed by a stone fireplace. Soft afternoon light filtered through gauze curtains, creating the kind of golden atmosphere that made whispered conversations feel sacred. Hazel had transformed a corner into an impromptu nursery, laying out a soft blanket and surrounding it with toys she'd pulled from what appeared to be a well-organized diaper bag. Milo settled onto the blanket with the satisfied sigh of a traveler reaching home, immediately reaching for a stuffed elephant that had seen better days. "He loves that thing," Hazel said softly, settling cross-legged beside their son. "Camden gave it to him for his first birthday. Said every boy needs a faithful companion. Camden, of course." Thatcher felt a stab of something that might have been jealousy or grief, or both. Another man had been there for Milo's first birthday, first steps, first words. All the milestones Thatcher had missed because he'd been too proud to answer his phone. What was his first word? The question came out hoarse. Hazel looked up, surprised by the raw vulnerability in his voice. "Mama, at 10 months. She paused, watching Milo stack colorful blocks with intense concentration. His second word was no. He's very definitive about his opinions. Despite everything, Thatcher almost smiled. Wonder where he gets that from. Both of us, probably. Hazel's voice held the faintest hint of humor. He's stubborn like you, but he laughs like me. He's got your focus when he's interested in something, but my need for constant snuggles. She was painting a picture of their child with casual affection, creating a person Thatcher desperately wanted to know. Each detail felt like a gift and a loss simultaneously. Does he ask about having a father? The question hung in the air like smoke. Hazel was quiet for so long that Thatcher wondered if he'd crossed a line he didn't even know existed. "He's 15 months old, Thatcher," she said finally. "He doesn't ask about anything complex yet, but someday he will." She smoothed Milo's hair as he babbled to his elephant. "And I've been dreading that day since the moment I realized you weren't going to be part of his life." The words hit him like a physical blow. "I didn't know there was a life to be part of." "Because you didn't want to know." There was no accusation in her voice, just tired acceptance. "After the divorce, you made it clear that our chapter was closed. Permanently." "That's not what I—" Thatcher stopped because wasn't it exactly what he'd meant? Hadn't he instructed Beverly to handle any contact from Hazel? Hadn't he thrown himself into work specifically to avoid thinking about what he'd lost? "I was pregnant and terrified," Hazel continued, her voice growing quieter. "I'd just lost my husband, my home, my entire life as I knew it. And the one person who should have been there for me had made it abundantly clear that I was on my own." Milo looked up at the sound of his mother's voice, sensing the shift in her emotional temperature. With the uncanny intuition of small children, he abandoned his toys and crawled over to her, pulling himself up to lean against her knee. "It's okay, baby," she murmured, lifting him into her lap. "Mama's okay." Watching her soothe their child, Thatcher felt something crack open inside his chest. This was what he'd walked away from. Not just Hazel, but this. The quiet intimacy of a family. The way love looked when it was lived rather than just spoken. "I would have stayed," he said suddenly. "If I'd known about him, I would have stayed." Hazel looked at him with eyes that held 2 years of accumulated pain. "No, you wouldn't have." "Yes, I would have." "Thatcher." Her voice was gentle but implacable. "You left me when I needed you most, and I wasn't even pregnant yet. You checked out of our marriage months before we signed those papers. A baby wouldn't have changed that. It would have just given you one more thing to feel trapped by." The truth of it was devastating because it was probably accurate. 2 years ago, he'd been so consumed with his own emotional paralysis that he'd probably seen a pregnancy as another obligation, another way he could fail someone who depended on him. But now he looked at Milo, really looked at him, and felt something he'd never experienced before. Not just love, though that was there, overwhelming and immediate, but purpose. The bone-deep certainty that this child was supposed to exist, that everything that had led to this moment suddenly made sense. "I'm different now," he said quietly. "Are you?" Hazel shifted Milo, who was getting sleepy in her arms. "Or are you just scared because suddenly there are consequences to your choices that you can't buy your way out of?" The question was fair and brutal. Was this just panic? The shock of discovery making him temporarily sentimental? Thatcher thought about the last 2 years. The empty penthouse, the mechanical routine of work and sleep, the way he'd gradually stopped feeling anything at all. He thought about watching Rowena's wedding and seeing what love looked like when people were brave enough to choose it every day. He thought about Milo's tiny fingers wrapped around his, and the way his heart had recognized home in a stranger's eyes. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe both, but I want to find out." Hazel was quiet, rocking Milo gently as his eyelids grew heavy. "Want isn't enough, Thatcher. I wanted our marriage to work. I wanted you to let me in. I wanted you to fight for us instead of just disappearing." She looked at him directly. Wanting something doesn't make you capable of having it. Then what does? Showing up. Every day. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. She stood carefully, settling the now sleeping Milo onto the blanket. Can you do that? Can you show up for him even when he's sick at 3 in the morning or having a tantrum in the grocery store or when being his father means your perfectly controlled life becomes messy and unpredictable? Thatcher watched his son sleep, noting the way his little chest rose and fell, the way his fingers twitched in dreams. This perfect person who existed because of one night when he and Hazel had managed to find each other across the wreckage of their marriage. I want to try, he said. Trying isn't enough either. Hazel's voice was soft but steel-edged. He's not a business deal you can walk away from if it gets complicated. He's a person who will need you to be steady and present and emotionally available. Can you be those things? Could he? The honest answer was that he didn't know. But looking at Milo, feeling the weight of everything he'd already missed, Thatcher knew he had to find out. I don't know how to be a father, he said quietly, but I want to learn. And for the first time in his life, wanting something felt like the beginning of actually fighting for it. Some decisions are made in the quiet hours when the world feels full of possibilities. Thatcher hadn't slept. He'd returned to his hotel room after the reception ended, loosened his tie, and spent the entire night sitting in the chair by the window, staring out at the vineyard bathed in moonlight. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Milo's face. Those familiar gray eyes, the way he'd reached for Thatcher's finger with such trust, the perfect weight of him sleeping on the blanket. His son. The word still felt foreign, like trying on clothes that might not fit, but something fundamental had shifted in his chest, a tectonic plate moving after years of being locked in place. At 6:30 in the morning, he gave up pretending he might sleep and drove to the only place in Napa Valley he knew would be open, a small diner called Mel's that looked like it had been serving coffee and honest conversation since the 1950s. The waitress, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and efficient movements, poured his coffee without being asked and set down a menu he didn't intend to use. You look like a man with something heavy on his mind, she observed. That obvious? Honey, I've been serving coffee to troubled souls for 38 years. You've got that look. She refilled his cup even though he'd barely touched it. Food helps. So does talking to strangers who mind their own business. Despite everything, Thatcher almost smiled. I just found out I have a son. The words came out before he could stop them, raw and unfiltered. The waitress, her name tag read, Dolores, didn't even blink. Congratulations or condolences? I'm not sure yet. He stared into his coffee cup like it might hold answers. I missed the first 15 months of his life. I didn't even know he existed. That's rough. Dolores leaned against the counter, clearly settling in for the kind of conversation that only happened in diners at dawn. His mama didn't tell you? She tried. I wasn't, available. The single syllable carried a world of understanding. You were being an ass. The blunt assessment was so accurate it was almost funny. Yeah, I was being an ass. Well, the good news is that being an ass isn't a permanent condition. Dolores straightened up as the bell above the door chimed. Question is, what are you going to do about it now? Thatcher turned to see who had entered and felt his heart stop. Hazel stood in the doorway looking uncertain and tired, her hair pulled back in a messy bun and wearing jeans and a sweater that made her look younger than her 34 years. In her arms, Milo was wide awake and curious, taking in the diner's red vinyl booths and chrome fixtures with the fascination of someone seeing the world for the first time. I'm sorry, Hazel said, spotting Thatcher immediately. I didn't know you were here. We can go. Don't. He stood up, nearly knocking over his coffee cup. Please, stay. Hazel hesitated, clearly torn between flight and the need for caffeine that every parent understood. Milo made the decision for her by pointing at the colorful jukebox in the corner and babbling excitedly. Jukebox, Hazel said patiently. That's a jukebox, baby. Bah, bah, Milo responded with authority, as if he'd been waiting his whole life to share this observation. He's very social in the mornings, Hazel said, sliding into the booth across from Thatcher. Milo immediately stood up in her lap, using the table for balance while he surveyed his new domain. Does he always wake up this early? 6:15 every day, like he has an internal alarm clock. Hazel accepted coffee from Dolores with the grateful expression of the chronically sleep-deprived. I was hoping to grab breakfast before we head back to the city. You're leaving today? Something in his voice made her look at him more carefully. That was the plan. I have work tomorrow, and Milo has a routine. What kind of work? It was a basic question, but he realized with shame that he didn't actually know what Hazel did for a living anymore. During their marriage, she'd been between jobs, trying to figure out her career path. Another thing he'd failed to pay attention to. I'm a freelance graphic designer. I work from home mostly, which makes it easier with Milo. She pulled a sippy cup from her bag and handed it to him. I do websites, marketing materials, some logo work. It's not glamorous, but it's flexible. Milo, meanwhile, had discovered that he could bang his sippy cup against the table and create fascinating sounds. Each bang made him giggle with delight, clearly proud of his musical talents. He's going to be a drummer, Thatcher observed. God, I hope not. I'm already sleep-deprived enough. But Hazel was smiling as she said it, the kind of exasperated affection that belonged uniquely to parents. They sat in comfortable, uncomfortable silence for a moment, watching Milo explore the physics of cause and effect with his cup. Dolores appeared with coloring books and crayons, earning herself a devoted fan in Milo, who immediately abandoned his cup in favor of artistic expression. Can I ask you something? Thatcher said finally. Hazel nodded, though her posture suggested she was bracing herself. Are you happy? Really happy, I mean. Not just surviving or getting by, but actually happy. She considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. Most days, yes, it's different than I thought happiness would look like when I was younger, but she watched Milo scribble enthusiastically on his coloring book. He makes everything worth it, even the hard parts. And before him? When you were pregnant and I wasn't, he couldn't finish the sentence. When you weren't there? Hazel's voice was gentle but direct. No, I wasn't happy then. I was scared and angry and heartbroken, but I had to figure out how to be okay anyway because he was depending on me. The weight of what she'd carried alone pressed against Thatcher's chest. I'm sorry. I know that's not enough, but I'm sorry. I know you are. She reached over to steady Milo's crayon when his enthusiasm threatened to send it flying. But sorry doesn't give him back the father he should have had from the beginning. It doesn't erase the nights I spent wondering if I was doing everything wrong, or the moments when I wished I had someone to share them with. I want to be that person now. I want to be his father. Wanting isn't the same as doing, Thatcher. Fatherhood isn't a part-time job or a weekend hobby. It's showing up every day, even when, especially when, it's inconvenient or messy or doesn't fit into your carefully planned life. Milo looked up from his coloring as if sensing the tension in the conversation. He studied Thatcher with those serious gray eyes, then held out his crayon like an offering. For me? Thatcher asked softly. Da, Milo said solemnly, which seemed to mean yes in whatever language 15-month-olds spoke. Thatcher accepted the crayon with the reverence of receiving a royal decree. Thank you. Milo beamed, proud of his generosity, then immediately went back to his artistic endeavors. He likes you, Hazel observed quietly. How can you tell? He doesn't usually share his crayons. You must seem trustworthy to him. She paused, her voice growing softer. Kids are good judges of character. They sense things adults miss. Maybe that was the answer he'd been looking for all night. Not whether he deserved to be Milo's father, but whether he could become the kind of man this child already seemed to believe he was. Truth has its own gravity. It pulls everything toward itself until there's nowhere left to hide. After breakfast, Hazel suggested they walk through the vineyard's sculpture garden while Milo napped in his stroller. The morning had warmed into the kind of perfect California day that made people believe in second chances, with golden light filtering through the grapevines and the distant sound of wedding cleanup, creating a gentle backdrop to their tentative conversation. Milo had fallen asleep the moment the stroller started moving. His head tilted to one side and his small fist clutched around the crayon Thatcher had returned to him. Watching his son sleep, Thatcher felt that now familiar tightness in his chest, part wonder, part grief for all the moments he'd already missed. He always falls asleep in moving vehicles, Hazel said softly, following his gaze. Car, stroller, shopping cart. Movement is like a sedative for him. Does he sleep well at night? Now he does. The first 6 months were... She shook her head. Let's just say I understand why sleep deprivation is considered torture. They walked in silence for a few minutes, navigating the gravel path between abstract sculptures that seemed to emerge from the landscape like metal flowers. Thatcher found himself studying Hazel from his peripheral vision, noting the changes 2 years had brought. She moved with more confidence now, her shoulders straighter, her step more sure. Motherhood had given her a kind of quiet strength he'd never seen before. Can I ask you something difficult? He said finally. Hazel nodded, though her hands tightened slightly on the stroller handle. When you found out you were pregnant, Did you ever consider not having him? The question hung in the air like smoke. Hazel was quiet for so long that Thatcher wondered if he'd crossed a line too sacred to uncross. Yes, she said finally. For about 36 hours I considered every option. She stopped walking, turning to face him fully. I was alone, unemployed, and my marriage had just ended. The practical part of my brain made very compelling arguments. What changed your mind? I went to the first ultrasound appointment by myself. I wasn't even sure I wanted to see. But then there he was. Her voice grew soft with memory. This tiny heartbeat on the screen, this possibility of a person, and I thought about all the ways I'd already been disappointed in my life, all the dreams that hadn't worked out the way I'd planned. She looked down at sleeping Milo. But this felt different. Like maybe this was the dream I didn't know I was supposed to have. Thatcher felt something crack open in his chest. I should have been there. Yes, you should have. There was no anger in her voice, just acknowledgement of a fact. But you weren't, and I had to make the decision without you. I had to build a life for both of us without you. They resumed walking, the stroller wheels crunching softly on gravel. A hawk circled overhead, riding thermal currents with the kind of effortless grace Thatcher envied. What was it like? He asked. Being pregnant alone? Terrifying. Lonely. Beautiful. Hazel paused at a sculpture that looked like two figures reaching toward each other across an impossible distance. I talked to him constantly, told him about everything I was seeing, everything I was feeling. I wanted him to know my voice when he arrived. Did you ever talk to him about me? The question came out smaller than he'd intended. Hazel looked at him with something that might have been pity. Every day. I told him about his father, who was brilliant and successful, and capable of incredible focus when something mattered to him. She pushed the stroller around a small pothole. I also told him that his father was scared of love, and that sometimes people run away from the things that could make them happiest. You were protecting him. From me. I was protecting him from the idea that love should hurt, that caring about someone means accepting their absence. Hazel's voice grew firmer. I never wanted him to grow up thinking that was normal. They'd reached the end of the sculpture garden where a bench overlooked the valley spreading out below them. Hazel sat down carefully, angling the stroller so Milo stayed in the shade. Thatcher joined her, maintaining a respectful distance that felt both natural and charged with possibility. He'll want to know about you someday, Hazel said quietly. He'll ask questions I can't answer. What kind of questions? Why weren't you there when he was born? Why didn't you want to meet him? Why didn't you love his mother enough to fight for your family? She turned to look at him directly. What do you want me to tell him? The questions hit like physical blows, each one a reckoning with choices he'd made in grief and pride and fear. What could he tell his son about the man he'd been? How could he explain that love had felt like drowning, that commitment had seemed like a trap, that he'd run because staying felt impossible? Tell him. Thatcher stopped, searching for words that could carry the weight of truth without crushing the innocence of childhood. Tell him that his father was broken in ways he didn't understand, and that breaking someone else seemed easier than fixing himself. And now I want to learn how to be whole. For him. For you. If you'll let me. Thatcher looked at Milo, still sleeping peacefully despite the magnitude of the conversation happening above his head. I want to be the kind of father he deserves, not the one I'm capable of being right now. That could take years, Thatcher. And he's growing up every day. I can't put his childhood on hold while you figure yourself out. I know. And he did know with crystalline clarity that this was his one chance to get it right. But I'm not asking you to wait. I'm asking you to let me show up. Every day. Starting now. Hazel was quiet, watching the valley below where morning mist was burning off under the strengthening sun. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. He's not a second chance at our marriage, Thatcher. He's not going to fix what was broken between us. I know that too. Thatcher turned to face her fully. I'm not asking for us back, I'm asking for the chance to be his father, to figure out what that means and how to do it right. And if you decide it's too hard, if the reality of fatherhood doesn't match the fantasy you're building in your head right now, then I'll do it anyway, because that's what parents do. The certainty in his own voice surprised him. He didn't ask to be born, and he sure didn't ask for a father who took 15 months to grow up. But he's here now, and he's mine, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to deserve him. Milo stirred in his stroller, making soft sounds that suggested he was waking up. Hazel leaned forward to check on him, her hand automatically smoothing his dark hair. He's going to wake up cranky, she said softly. He always does when he naps outside. What do you usually do when he's cranky? Sing to him. He likes lullabies, even though I'm a terrible singer. She looked at Thatcher with something that might have been hope. Do you want to try? And for the first time in his adult life, Thatcher Rowe said yes to something that scared him more than any boardroom negotiation ever could. Some moments become the foundation for everything that comes after. Milo woke up exactly as Hazel predicted, with the indignant confusion of someone who'd been disturbed from perfect slumber. His face scrunched into a pre-cry expression, those familiar gray eyes blinking against the dappled sunlight filtering through the grapevines. "Hey, sleepyhead," Hazel said softly, unbuckling him from the stroller. "You had a nice nap." But Milo was having none of it. He rubbed his eyes with tiny fists and let out the kind of wail that suggested the world had personally offended him. Other visitors to the sculpture garden turned to look, their expressions ranging from sympathetic to mildly annoyed. "He's not usually this loud," Hazel said apologetically, bouncing him gently. "The change in routine has him off balance." Thatcher watched his son's face crumple with distress and felt an unexpected surge of protective instinct. This small person was unhappy, and every fiber of his being wanted to fix it. "What do you sing to him?" he asked. "Usually something my grandmother used to sing to me, but I'm really not." "Let me try." Hazel looked surprised but shifted Milo toward him. "Are you sure? He's pretty upset, and he doesn't really know you yet." "I'm sure." The transfer was awkward at first. Milo's crying intensified when he found himself in unfamiliar arms, his little body rigid with distress. Thatcher felt panic rise in his throat. What if he couldn't comfort his own child? What if Milo rejected him completely? Then he remembered something from his own childhood, buried so deep he'd forgotten it existed. His father, Marcus Rowe, had been many things. Demanding, distant, emotionally unavailable in the way that successful men of his generation often were. But there had been one night, when Thatcher was maybe 4 years old and burning with fever, when his father had sat beside his bed and sung. Not well. Marcus Rowe had possessed many talents, but singing wasn't among them. But he'd sung anyway, his deep voice rough with exhaustion and worry until Thatcher had finally fallen asleep. Now, holding his own son, Thatcher reached for that half-remembered melody. "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine." His voice was rusty from disuse, uncertain on the notes, but he kept going. Milo's crying didn't stop immediately, but it shifted from outraged wailing to hiccuping sobs. "You make me happy when skies are gray." Thatcher found himself swaying slightly, the movement natural and instinctive. He could feel Hazel watching them, but he couldn't spare attention for her reaction. All his focus was on this small, upset person who shared his eyes and his stubborn streak. "You'll never know, dear, how much I love you." Milo's sobs were quieting now, replaced by the shuddering breaths that came after hard crying. His small hand found the fabric of Thatcher's shirt and gripped it, holding on like an anchor. "Please don't take my sunshine away." By the time Thatcher reached the end of the verse, Milo had gone completely still in his arms. Not asleep, his eyes were wide and alert, but calm, listening, as if something in his father's voice had finally reached him. "That was my father's song," Thatcher said quietly, his voice rough with emotion he hadn't expected. "I haven't thought about it in 30 years. Hazel wiped at her eyes, not bothering to hide the tears there. "He stopped crying. He's listening." Thatcher looked down at Milo, who was indeed studying his face with the intense concentration that babies brought to new experiences. "Hi there, buddy. I'm your dad." The words felt different this time, not foreign or frightening, but true. Simple and complicated and terrifyingly real. Milo reached up with one small hand, his fingers finding Thatcher's jaw and exploring with the careful curiosity of a scientist. His touch was gentle, wondering, as if he was trying to memorize this new person who'd appeared in his world. "Duh," Milo said solemnly. Thatcher's breath caught. "Did he just—" "That's his word for everything right now," Hazel said quickly. "Don't read too much into—" "Duh," Milo repeated, this time looking directly at Thatcher with those serious gray eyes. Then, as if he'd made some internal decision, he smiled. It was like watching the sun rise, this perfect, gummy smile that transformed his entire face, making him look like the happiest person who'd ever existed. And he was giving it to Thatcher, this stranger, who'd been absent for every important moment of his short life, who'd failed him before he'd even had the chance to try. "Oh," Thatcher whispered, feeling something fundamental shift inside his chest. "Oh, Milo." He pressed a kiss to the top of his son's head, inhaling the sweet baby scent of him. powder and innocence and infinite possibility. This was love, he realized. Not the complicated, frightening emotion he'd spent years running from, but something pure and essential, and absolutely non-negotiable. This was what people meant when they talked about unconditional love. This was what his father must have felt, holding his feverish son and singing badly in the dark. This was what Hazel had discovered the moment she saw Milo's heartbeat on that ultrasound screen. This was what he'd been missing his entire life. "I love you," he whispered against Milo's hair, the words coming easily for the first time in his life. "I love you, and I'm sorry it took me so long to find you." Milo babbled something in response, his small hands patting Thatcher's chest as if to say it's okay, you're here now. When Thatcher finally looked up, he found Hazel watching them with an expression he couldn't quite read. Part wonder, part fear, part something that looked almost like hope. "He likes you," she said softly. "I think I like him too." Thatcher's voice was hoarse with emotion. "Actually, I think I'm completely gone on him." "That's how it works," Hazel said, stepping closer to them both. "One minute you're fine, and the next minute you'd move mountains to make sure they're happy. Is it always this intense? Only for the first 18 years or so. Despite everything, the pain, the mistakes, the 2 years of missed chances, Thatcher found himself laughing. Real laughter, the kind that came from joy instead of politeness. And Milo, delighted by this new sound, laughed back. In that moment, surrounded by sculptures and sunshine, and the promise of everything they could build together, Thatcher Rowe finally understood what it meant to come home. 6 months later, love is not a destination. It's a practice, repeated daily, in moments both ordinary and extraordinary. The playground in Central Park buzzed with the chaotic energy of a Saturday afternoon in spring. Children raced across monkey bars and down slides while parents clustered on benches, half watching their offspring while stealing precious moments of adult conversation. Thatcher Rowe sat cross-legged in the sandbox, his expensive suit pants already dusted with sand, building what could generously be called a castle with his 21-month-old son. Milo took his architectural duties seriously, carefully placing each bucket of sand exactly where his father indicated, then immediately knocking down whatever they'd built with the delighted laughter of someone who understood that destruction could be just as satisfying as creation. "Tower," Thatcher said patiently, rebuilding for the 4th time. "This is a tower, buddy." "Tow," Milo repeated solemnly, then promptly demolished it again with his plastic shovel. "He's definitely your son," came a familiar voice behind them. Thatcher turned to find Hazel approaching with 2 coffee cups and the patient expression of someone who'd been watching this same scene play out for 20 minutes. She'd started joining their Saturday playground visits a month ago, tentatively at first, then with growing comfort as she watched Thatcher navigate the territory of active fatherhood. "What's that supposed to mean?" he asked, accepting his coffee gratefully. "He builds things up just so he can knock them down. Very corporate." Hazel settled onto the bench nearby, close enough to supervise but far enough to give them space. "How did the meeting with your board go yesterday?" "Better than expected." Thatcher helped Milo fill his bucket again, marveling at how these small hands had become the most important things in his world. "I told them I wouldn't be available for weekend calls anymore, or after 7 p.m. on weekdays." "How did they take it?" "About as well as you'd expect. Henderson looked like I'd announced I was joining the circus." Thatcher grinned. "But the quarterly numbers speak for themselves. Turns out I'm actually more effective when I'm not working 18-hour days." It was true. The last 6 months had been a revelation in more ways than one. Forcing himself to leave the office at reasonable hours to be present for dinner and bath time and bedtime stories had initially felt like cutting off a limb, but something unexpected had happened. His focus at work had sharpened. Without the luxury of endless hours, he'd become ruthlessly efficient, delegating more, trusting his team, making decisions faster and with more confidence. And the time with Milo, that had become sacred. "Dada," Milo announced, holding up a seashell he'd found buried in the sandbox. Shell, Thatcher agreed, accepting this treasure with appropriate reverence. "Very nice shell, buddy." The word Dada still hit him like a physical blow every time he heard it. 3 months ago, Milo had progressed from his generic "da" to the specific recognition of fatherhood, and Thatcher had actually cried the first time it happened, right there in the pediatrician's waiting room, while Milo sat on his lap flipping through a board book and casually revolutionizing his father's understanding of joy. "He's gotten so much more verbal," Hazel observed. "Remember when his biggest accomplishment was saying no to everything? He still says no to everything. Now he just explains why. Thatcher watched Milo carefully sort his collection of sandbox treasures. Shells, interesting rocks, a discarded toy car some other child had left behind. Yesterday he told me, "No bath, Dada. I'm busy," when I tried to get him ready for bed. What was he busy with? Staring at the ceiling fan. Apparently it was very important ceiling fan business. Hazel laughed. The sound lighter than Thatcher remembered from their marriage. She was different now, more confident, more settled in her own skin. Motherhood suited her in ways that wifehood never had, probably because she'd been free to discover it on her own terms. They were different too, he and Hazel. Not romantic. That ship had sailed and they both knew it. But something that felt more sustainable. Co-parents who genuinely liked each other, who'd learned to communicate without the weight of failed expectations and unspoken resentments. It wasn't the family Thatcher had imagined during his brief, naive fantasies of reconciliation, but it was real, and it was theirs, and Milo thrived in the center of it. "I have something to tell you," Hazel said, her tone shifting slightly. Thatcher looked up from where he was helping Milo construct what appeared to be a sand highway system. "Good something or concerning something?" "I think good. I hope good." She took a breath. "I've been seeing someone." The words hung in the air between them. Thatcher felt a complex surge of emotions. Surprise, a brief flicker of something that might have been jealousy, and then, surprisingly, genuine relief. "Tell me about him." "His name is David. He's a teacher at Milo's music class. You know, the one on Thursday mornings that you can never make because of your standing meetings. The one where they sing songs about farm animals and bang on tiny drums. That's the one." Hazel smiled. "He's patient with toddler meltdowns, he makes terrible dad jokes, and he already knows that Milo comes first. Always. Does Milo like him?" "He calls him Dave and always wants to show him his toy cars." Hazel paused. "I wanted you to hear it from me before you met him officially." Thatcher considered this development while Milo presented him with another shell for his approval. 6 months ago, the idea of another man in Hazel's life would have sent him into a spiral of possessiveness and regret. Now, looking at her face, the cautious happiness there, the way she seemed lighter when she talked about this David, he found he mostly felt grateful. Grateful that she was moving forward. Grateful that she'd found someone who understood that loving her meant loving Milo too. Grateful that she'd given him the gift of honesty instead of letting him discover it accidentally in some awkward playground encounter. "I'm happy for you," he said, and meant it. "When do I get to meet this paragon of patience and terrible jokes? Are you sure? It won't be weird for you?" "Hazel." Thatcher turned to face her fully. "You gave me the greatest gift of my life, and I spent 2 years pretending I didn't want it. The least I can do is be happy that you found someone who appreciates what an incredible woman you are." Her eyes filled with tears, though she was smiling. "That might be the nicest thing you've ever said to me. I'm working on saying nicer things in general. Milo's a tough critic. He doesn't laugh at my material unless it's genuinely funny." As if summoned by his name, Milo abandoned his construction project and toddled over to Thatcher with arms raised in the universal signal for up. Thatcher lifted him easily, marveling at how solid and real he felt. This perfect person who'd taught him that love wasn't something to be feared, but something to be practiced. "Hungry, Dada," Milo announced, patting Thatcher's cheek with sandy hands. "Hungry for what, buddy?" "Nanas. Bananas," Thatcher translated for Hazel's benefit, though she was already reaching into the diaper bag that had become a permanent fixture of their Saturday adventures. Watching Hazel peel a banana with the efficiency of someone who'd performed this task hundreds of times, watching Milo settle contentedly in his lap to eat it, Thatcher felt the familiar wash of gratitude that had become his default emotional state. This wasn't the life he'd planned. It wasn't the neat, controlled existence he'd once thought he wanted. It was messier, more complicated, infinitely more demanding than anything he'd ever taken on. It was also the first life that had ever felt worth living. "Dada," Milo said around a mouthful of banana, looking up at him with those serious gray eyes. "Sing song." "Which song, buddy?" "Sunshine Song." Thatcher looked at Hazel, who nodded encouragingly. They'd discovered that Milo had inherited his father's love of routine. The same songs, the same stories, the same bedtime rituals that made his world feel safe and predictable. "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine." Other parents in the playground turned to listen, charmed by the sight of this serious businessman singing to his sandy-faced toddler in the middle of Central Park on a Saturday afternoon. "You make me happy when skies are gray." Milo settled deeper into his father's arms, his small body relaxed and trusting. Hazel pulled out her phone and took a picture. Not posed or perfect, just real. A man and his son, and a song that connected them to something larger than themselves. "You'll never know, dear, how much I love you." As Thatcher sang, he thought about the man he'd been 6 months ago. Successful, certainly. Accomplished, definitely. But fundamentally alone in ways he'd been too afraid to acknowledge. Now, covered in sandbox sand and banana fingerprints, singing off-key to a toddler who thought he hung the moon, Thatcher Rowe had never felt richer. "Please don't take my sunshine away." When the song ended, Milo clapped his sticky hands together and demanded more, with the authority of someone accustomed to having his requests honored. So Thatcher sang it again, and would continue singing it every time his son asked, for as long as Milo wanted to hear it. Because that's what fathers do. They show up, they sing songs, and they love without conditions or reservations. They choose every day to be the sunshine their children deserve. Do you have the courage to love someone even when it changes everything you thought you knew about yourself? What would you do if life gave you a second chance at the love you thought you'd lost forever? Your participation in this channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below, letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.